friends. I'm Kerry Pharr. I'm the host of the television program In Your Corner. And what I want to do today is I want to introduce a series of programs, actually the first in a series of programs called Country Stages to Gospel Hymns. It's about country stars who gave their life to Jesus Christ and now sing gospel hymns.
Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee.
So our first guest is the amazing John Berry, who has an incredible story. His mother led him to the Lord when he was 9 years of age. He became a sensation in country music, and then shortly, a couple of years ago, battled throat cancer. You're going to love John's amazing story that we're about to share with you right now. John, take us back to your youth, and, did you always want to be a country singer?
Well, I've always wanted to be a singer. Country music wasn't anything I grew up around. The only thing I knew about country is Saturday nights it came on a hee-haw. That's all I knew about it. And I just wasn't familiar with it.
So who were your favorite groups when you were a teen?
Oh, when I was growing up, of course, I listened to the radio and like all kids, and music at that time in the late 60s, early 70s was a hodgepodge of everything. And I can remember in the early 70s, the format lines hardly existed on radio. Pop radio was just popular music from all genres. You hear everything from the Shy-Lights singing Have You Seen Her to Behind Closed Doors.
Yeah, Charlie Rich.
I want to say Charlie Pride, I knew it right. Yeah, and then you hear John Denver and you hear Cat Stevens and you hear other stuff. Then the Eagles come along and it was like, if the Eagles, there was a time in the 90s, if they'd come out during the 90s, they'd have been a country act, like Restless Heart,
Yeah.
And but it was just a real hodgepodge of music. And so I grew up listening to everything. My mom listened to gospel music. My sister listened to the radio, so us kids were listening to what she listened to. My dad listened to Van Cliburn play the piano, And my sister got a record in the early 70s, Carole King Tapestry. And that's the first time I was introduced to an artist that wrote and sang all their own songs, That album, Tapestry, is a marvelous, marvelous work. And that really inspired me to listen to other singer-songwriters. Of course, I fell in love with John Denver, but one of my very favorites of all time. And then Allman Brothers, always loved the Allman Brothers Band, even though I never played that kind of music, always loved it, So,
What did you start singing in the beginning?
First started singing, did a lot of gospel music, I'd sing at church, and for my mom, always wanted me to come sing at church, so I'd go do things with her, but I think probably the first songs I really sang out publicly. Matter of fact, I remember I asked to sing at our high school assembly. I guess I was in 8th grade or maybe 9th grade, and I did a John Denver song.
I heard a story that you told on television about your mother leading you to faith in Jesus Christ as a young child. Can you tell that story?
I was about 9 years old, I think, and of course, I'd grown up going to church my whole life. If church was open, we were there. Berries were there. And I come home from school one day, and I had a lot on my mind, and my mom could tell I did. I remember she sitting on a little side porch of our house reading a magazine or something, and I went out there, and I sort of had a lot on my mind, didn't really know what to say, and like all little fellas, or big fellas too, I sort of scuffed my feet around kind of, and my mom, she put her magazine down, and she said, "Johnny, what is on your mind?" And I said, "Nothing, Mom." And she said, "Come here." And I sat on the porch swing next to her. And she put her arm around my shoulder. She pulled me real close to her. She said, "You tell your mom what's wrong. I can tell something's bothering you." I said, "Mom, I've been thinking about stuff they've been teaching me in Sunday school, and I don't understand. Teaching me about Jesus dying on the cross, and he rose again on the third day. And the Bible says stories, and the Bible tells us he's coming back for us one day. And there's a ghost involved that scares me to death." Holy Ghost, And she laughed, and she said, "Honey, it's the sweetest story ever told." And she explained it to me in a way I could understand it. And the one verse that always stuck out to me was John 3:16. And I knew John 3:16. Remember those little cross stitch? John 3:16, everybody hanging in the family den, and browns and yellows and, fall colors, And we had one of those, and I knew John 3:16, but she read it to me differently. She said, "Look right here. It says, for God so loves Johnny that he gave his only son, that if Johnny will trust in him, Johnny will have everlasting life." That whosoever and whole world stuff, my little brain couldn't wrap around that, you know. But God loving me as a whole. That's what it is. It's a personal relationship, you know, and it changed the whole picture for me. So
John, from there, you had some monumental success. I mean, you won platinum records, gold records. Tell us about, when the success hit in country music.
it's funny, I never really thought much about getting a record deal. I started making my own records. My first album came out in 1979, a record called Humble Beginnings, a record I hope you never hear because it's so bad. Recorded in the basement of my parents' house. My friend Perry Barton I went to high school with, we built a little studio in my folks' basement, and I have better quality recording equipment on my iPhone than we had in that studio. And which didn't know what we were doing, but we learned a lot. And we recorded my first 4 albums we cut in that little recording studio. Then I moved to Athens, Georgia, and started playing in clubs there and developed a following there. We recorded an album there in Athens, and then came to Nashville, cut an album at a little studio up here in Nashville, Studio 815. It's not there anymore, on 18th Avenue. And I was just making my own records and playing clubs around Athens, Georgia, and surrounding areas, and making a good living. And it never really occurred to me about, I'm good, you know, I'm good just doing this right here. And I was driving home really late from playing a club in town, and this particular night, it's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning after a stop at Waffle House, getting out to our farm north of town. I had the radio on, DJ come on. He says, "Y'all turn it up. Got a brand new song from Joe Diffie." Now, I love Joe Diffie. Turn the volume up. And Joe sang a song called Ships That Don't Come In. Never had heard it before, brand new. And Joe got to that line in the song. He said, "And to those who stand on empty shores and spit against the wind, and those who wait forever for ships that don't come in." I could hardly see the road through tears. It hit me like a freight train. And I got home and I woke Robin up and I told her about this song of Joe's that I heard on the radio. And I said, "Baby, I know we're doing good. We've got a nice little farm here and playing clubs. We got a little RV we travel in, and truck with sound and light gear. I've dreamed bigger than this." And we sat up all night and we came up with a plan to come to Nashville every 45 days and do a little industry showcase. Nothing happened. We'll be back 45 days later, do another one. We're going to do that for 12 months. If nothing happened, we're going to embrace the Athens, Georgia culture, and we're going to punt, and we're going to make that our life, you know. But we got to try it one time. So we ended up coming to Nashville in May of 1992. We did an industry showcase at Douglas Corner. Had an ASCAP industry showcase invitation list. 250 names approximately on there. We sent out 250 personal invitations. One guy showed up. One guy. Herky Williams. Herky worked for Jimmy Bowen, president of Capitol. And Herky had heard about me from his sister, who went to the University of Georgia. So he was anxious to come here and play. And that night after we played, he was pretty stoked, and we went and got a bite to eat. And he calls me the next morning about 10 a.m. He goes, "Hey, can you be at Jimmy Bowen's house about 11:30? He wants to have come over for brunch." I said, "Man, we're already back in Athens."
Wow.
And we went home that night. And he said, "Daggone," he said, "Well, stay tuned." So he called me back about 3 days later. They'd set up a private showcase for me to come do a showcase for Bowen. And so we did that at one of the rehearsal facilities in town. And John Huey from CAA came with him, with Bowen, and David Corlew from Charlie Daniels Management came with him, and Herky was there, of course, and me and my band, and we did our 5, 6, 7 song set, and Bowen was just stoked as he could be. And he came up, he said, "Well," he said, "that was great, la, la, la." He goes, "I guess you come here looking for a record deal." And I said, "Yes, sir, I did." He said, "Corlew, you gonna represent this boy?" And David looked at me, I looked at him, I said, "I'm up if you are." And he goes, "Corlew, call me next week, let's put this together." Well, that he walked out the door, he goes. And that was it.
John, I'm sure you still sing all of those big hits, but you also sing gospel music. You've been singing gospel music all your life, but you were led to the Lord by your mom like at 9 years of age. So how do you transition from country music back to gospel music and et cetera?
I believe that Christ is in everything I do.
Yeah.
It's really funny when when we first had a label deal, it kind of drive A&R people a little crazy because they'd send me songs, and I said, "Well, I can't do that one, and can't do that one. I can't." And my test is can I play it? Would it pass the minivan test? Because my kids would learn songs faster than I would, and if I can't drive from Nashville back to Georgia with my kids in their car seats and play a song, if I listen to the lyrics, I go, oh, I wouldn't sing it. I was real. There's a few of them that maybe on the edge of that a little bit, but I was really particular about that, about types of songs that I would do. So I've never strayed much from that. I think it's honorable. So today, what are you doing mostly with your music today? Well, I was fortunate. Just over a year ago, Steve Dorff produced an album for me called Find My Joy. It's a collection of six old classic hymns and 4 new songs of faith, but they all kind of fit in. But I'd started the project a couple of times, but it never came together like I had in my head. I always wanted it to be like an extension of my Christmas music. Let's take beautiful Christmas songs and make them more beautiful. Chuck Howard had a real gift for doing it. I mean, he just make them more beautiful. So it was just a real treat to do that album. So that's mostly what we've been doing since that album came out, is doing a lot of performances. So life always throws us curves. I remember 1997, I managed a heavyweight boxer who was rated in the top 10 in the world. We were on television. He was knocking everybody out. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys that I used to train him had a stroke after the match. And then immediately after that, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so it kind of threw me for a loop, and life for me never was the same. And I know you kind of were sailing along and had a health battle in the years past too. And how's that all worked out for you? Well, God is good. And, I've had multiple things. I mean, go all the way back to 1981. I got run over by a car, riding a motorcycle, broke both my legs and my left hip. And, but then, the day I had my first #1 record, the day I had my very first #1 record, I had brain surgery. And I had a keloid cyst in the 3rd ventricle of my brain. Basically, it's a blister about the big as the end of my finger in the 3rd ventricle. And that's where the fluid drains down the spinal column. And it gotten big enough to block the fluid drainage. And the fluid built up around the brain and caused incredible headaches, loss of appetite, change of personality. And I turned into the meanest person on the planet. And really? Yeah, it was tough. Tough on my wife. And when I got my cancer diagnosis in January of 2019, throat cancer. My wife and I were talking that night about the events of the day. I said, I always believe that God uses these things to get our attention. Not that he causes these things, but he uses them, makes use of these things. God has used it to draw me closer to him. John, your life amazes me. Thank you so much for joining us today, brother. I appreciate that. It's a treat to be with you. Our next guest is the iconic Erlene Mandrell. She's so talented that she began playing drums in her Star Sisters band, Barbara Mandrell, at 11 years of age. At 18, she was a model for CoverGirl. And in her 20s, she was on the Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters TV program. And then she was also on Hee Haw for 9 years. You're going to love Erlene Mandrell's story. Later on, we'll conspire as we dream by the fire. Erlene, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Erlene, tell us about the Mandrell family singers.
Actually, Louise and I, being younger than Barbara, when Barbara really started traveling, well, she started when she was 11. She was a musical prodigy. But when she was a teenager, my dad started a band called the Mandrell Family Band. And my mom learned bass. She had been a keyboard player in her church, well, her brother's church. And so she was a great bass player. And then the drummer that they hired was Ken Dudney, who is now Barbara's husband, has been for, gosh, a long time. So they all went during Vietnam to perform overseas, and they didn't really go USO. I mean, they went to places that the military didn't normally get entertainment, and it was a little more dangerous. But when they came back, there was so many stories. I think that's where I became like passionate for our military because of what they did and the stories I heard. But Louise and I, in the meantime, started practicing our instruments. I was learning drums. Ken had taught me some things, and then I was staying with, and my dad's brother was he was an architect, but he was also a Dixieland jazz drummer. So he would help me with the drums, and Mom had taught Louise some bass, and she was also learning, now she plays fiddle, but it was violin from school. So we were practicing our instruments. And then after the second tour, Barbara had turned 18 and she married Ken. And she retired from the music business because she became Ken's wife. He became a Navy pilot and got stationed in Washington. So we moved to Tennessee, New Bern, Tennessee, where my dad's uncle was. And it was such a small town for us. It was really different. But Louise said, let's not quit playing our instruments. Let's keep practicing because you know she won't stay retired. And being in Tennessee, when Ken went to Germany, Barbara came to visit, and she and Dad went to the Opry. And she said, I cannot sit out here. I've got to be on stage. So he started managing her, and we moved to Nashville. And then at one point, Barbara said, I don't want to work as a single and just pick up a band. Can you guys be my band? Because she wasn't working all the time. And we could just take off school during that time and work with her. And she hired a guitar player, and I played drums, Louise's bass and fiddle, and Barbara played steel and saxophone and all kind of banjo, all kinds of things. And eventually we started working all the time together. So we weren't really the Mandrell singers, but actually Louise and I were members of the original Do-Rights, which was name of Barbara's band.
So you started at a very young age. You were playing drums with her like at 11 years of age.
I did start. Luckily, we started learning really, really young. So by the time Barbara needed a band, I guess I was 11. And Louise is 2 years older than me, 18 months, something like that. But we went to Germany, and usually Daddy would go with us. But in this case, it was just the three of us girls and a guitar player, Leon Bollinger. And it was so much fun. So many things happened, picking up instruments and different things that happened on stage that you never knew what was going to go on. One night, I think we were borrowing instruments. My drum, the snare, I was having to hold it on doing a rim shot because it collapsed. And by the end of the show, the bass drum pedal broke, and I was playing like this, but something happened with Barbara's instrument, and Louise's amplifier she was using just kind of started smoking, and anything that can go wrong went wrong. And it turned out, like Louise and I later, we were in the ladies' restroom, and they didn't know we were in there. We could hear them talking, and they said, wow, that was such an exciting show, so different. Like, yeah, we didn't crash our guitars, but just about. But we had so much that happened between us. I think that was a really great bonding period for all of us. And Barbara was expecting her oldest child at the time. So we were sharing a room, and she would wake up, it was like, massage my leg, I'm getting a cramp and all that. So we ended up staying longer because they booked more shows. And we'd be on the Autobahn. For you that don't, everybody I think knows in Germany the Autobahn, there's no speed limit. So we're just going from one, we worked all military. So we go from one base to the next. And it was just exciting, but we stayed longer. And by the time to come home, Barbara was pretty far along. So just a funny story I think of when we were over there. She's like trying to suck her stomach in. She didn't want Matt to be born in Germany. And so she's saying, they're like, where's your note from your doctor? She said, do I look that far along? And Leon Bollinger, he's great, very country. but he always carried his boot bag so it wouldn't get messed up in the plane, shaped like a boot. And he put it on the counter and he goes, "I'm her doctor. What's the problem?" And the lady just goes, "No, you go home." You just go. So it was fun. There was always something going on. And, we're still pretty close. And there's so many things growing up on the road. Even after that, when you have a bus that you're all traveling on from date to date, it's instead of getting up and just, dinner and everybody having a family dinner, which is wonderful. You get up in the morning and you go straight to that kitchen nook where everybody's talking and you sit around and you share and you bond. So it was awesome time, the best, connection for sisters.
Yeah, and your sister Barbara was already famous, but then television came calling and you ended up with a massive television show. Tell us how all of that happened, and you ended up being a big star yourself.
Thank you. Actually, then I wasn't working for Barbara. I had left, and I had gotten into some modeling and stuff like that. And Louise had gotten married and then came back, and then she was singing. And so we weren't working together at the time. We would try to see each other now and then, but I actually, during that time, I was married to Rick Boyer. I'm married to Pat Holt now, but we're still good friends. And I was expecting, and I was so excited about having a baby. But I miscarried. I had a miscarriage, and because the baby had been dead for 2 weeks, they said, "No, you can't have one right away." And, you get to be in that mother mode. And I'm like, "No, I want to have a baby." So I prayed about it, and so as I don't really do now, I kind of made that deal with God, but mainly God, so I know what you want me to do. If I'm really not supposed to have a baby right away, I just started modeling. I want some modeling jobs. And so, like right away, I started getting calls that I hadn't gotten before, and I just got my composite out there, and I got an ad for Waylon Jennings' Greatest Hits, and it was really cool. It was a full color on cash box. And a waterbed store. I got CoverGirl shoes. Just everything came up within a couple months. And it usually doesn't happen that fast. And then I get a call from Barbara that said, "Do you want to do a national television show with Louise and I?" I said, "Let me see. Yes." And so I'm like, "God, thank you." If I had gotten pregnant right away, I couldn't have done the show. My life would have gone a different path. And as it was, after the we had a couple years. The show was doing great, but Barbara had it's a long story, but she had some throat problems at the time, so we had to quit. But I came back and did Hee Haw and all of that, and I decided to start a family, and it was great, especially with Hee Haw, because Sam Labello started Hee Haw, was a creator, Italian, and I said, my dad and Sam and I were talking, and I said, "Well, one thing, I want to do Hee Haw." I'd done it as a guest. I knew most of everybody on the show, Uncle Grandpa Jones, and we were just really close, and Miss Minnie. But I said, "I really want to start a family." And he said, "Are you kidding? Everybody has kids on the show. What do you think the cornfield's for?" They hide behind the cornfield. And I got my own spot, the Cornfield County operator, and I had a shawl, so sometimes I looked a little bigger because I had 2 children while I was on Hee Haw. But it's great, the path that God helps you go through if you listen and you try to follow the direction He's leading you.
Yeah, and you've mentioned prayer and God a couple times, so evidently you're a woman of faith.
Even more and more all the time. It's great how it grows. I was raised in a family who believed in Jesus, and when we lived in New Bern, Tennessee, my Uncle Ira was a preacher there, and also my mom's brother, Ralph, where Mom had played the keyboard that I mentioned, being a preacher, and both those churches were great, just country churches where you just sang the old songs and listened, and I know my mom's church being in Illinois, and we were out in California when I was little, but we would make such a long drive, and we would go out to see my grandmother in Fairfield. And I remember that church as a kid more than any of the other churches that we would go to. Because before it was just like, get ready, go to church, go to Sunday school. But I don't really have any memories, other than getting ready and going, but not of the church specifically. But when I got to my Uncle Ralph's church in Illinois, it was like my memories of that, I was so young, are great. He had the kids come out and sing for the adults all the time and participate. And it was where Barbara debuted at 4 years old playing the accordion, because he wanted to involve the kids. And I just, so many of the songs and of course, a lot of the town were cousins, because my grandmother had 10 kids and they had kids and my mom was the youngest. So that, it was like a family reunion anyway. But that was a church that for a childhood that I remember. And then I was like 9 and 10 for Uncle Ira's church. And that's where Louise and I played our instruments in church for the first time. And that was a big deal. I have to say, I loved Uncle Ira, and his preaching, I'm sure, was great, but I love the music so much because we got to play it. It was fun.
Well, you had an experience as a Christian that was really meaningful to you. Tell us about that.
Well, and I didn't understand some of this until the last few years. I can't go to Denver where I fell in love with Andrew Womack. And so I took what I could online. So I did the first year of Kerry Bible College, and I've learned a lot since that. But even though I knew I had been born again at a very young age, because it seemed like that was I always took Jesus as my Savior. It always was. That part didn't stand out, being born again at that moment. But there was a time, and it was before the television show, but I was late teens, early 20s, something like that. And I was upset about something a little bit, so I started praying. And then I thought, well, I wanted to speak in tongues, because I had heard that that's a good way of connecting with Jesus. And you don't always know what you're saying, but it's something that's supposed to make you feel good. So I prayed for that, and then I started speaking in tongues, and I just kept doing it. But in the meantime, as I'm praying, I could feel like my spirit was floating around the room. I'll try to think about it. It was such a really good feeling. And it's like if you're flying, but only you're here, but you feel like part of you is flying around. It was just an incredible feeling. So I just thought that was an experience from speaking in tongues. And I told my preacher, which I had a preacher at that point, was the first preacher that I really knew that just preached the love of God and the love of Jesus. And I asked him about it. And I said, after that, I could speak in tongues, but it wasn't the same feeling. And well, as it turned out, I always think it was just I had to focus more on God and less on tongues, which is probably true. But I didn't realize that the baptism of the Holy Spirit was separate than being born again, and that I was experiencing that. And it's wonderful, and I've gotten to talk to a lot of people since about that, because I have a radio show called God Reigns Miracles. And quite a few different people have talked about getting baptized in the Holy Spirit, and how, some of them just like, I couldn't even stand up. It was so powerful. And just everybody experienced it in different ways, but it's always amazing and always good. And so it was so neat to find out what that was, but I always remember it.
Well, in addition to the radio program, what are you doing today?
Well, I started recording. I didn't really sing that much growing up, because when I got back on drums and I was young, and I felt like I just wanted to be a good drummer, and I focused on that. But about, how many years have I been married? 8 years, about 9 years ago, I would go off and do meet and greets and different charities and stuff. And I had sang and stuff on Louise's Christmas show and things, but I was talking to somebody about doing a charity for veterans, and now my husband, but I was dating Pat Holt, and he's a producer. And so someone said, hey, we could do a CD for that and promote that. And I'm like, well, I'm not recording. I don't record. And Pat comes over, he goes, honey, I can help you with that. And because Pat was a Vietnam veteran, and our age, all our dads, I guess, because of World War II, fought. So both of our dads were World War II veterans. So we started this project, making this. It's a CD dedicated to all military veterans and first responders. And we would just be in tears listening to some of the words to these songs. And so we ended up putting that project together. And on some of it, I had my kids singing and my son playing drums. And so on the back of it, it was neat as a first project to have a picture of my kids and me and do that with them. And since then, too, lately anyway, I'm working on it's spiritual. I don't know how to, there's different categories in religious music. So it's not all down home gospel. It's, I guess, just Christian, music that touches my heart. And I have released a couple of those, but we want to make an album, spiritual album. And I've done couple country songs I've recorded. So I don't go on the road in a big bus because I don't want to be gone all the time, because I still have my mom. Pat has recordings that he needs to do, and I have grandkids and my kids, but grandkids that I see all the time, and it's really a blessing.
Yeah. Erlene, thank you so much for being so gracious and kind and opening up your home to let us interview you today. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Friends, thank you for tuning in today. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode, Country Stages to Gospel Hymns.